It is time for some people to go back to school. There's a whole lot of energy going on up there, I'll tell you. We're talking about tables this summer at First Pres as we begin gearing up for what is one of the best Sunday mornings of the year, our annual carry-in breakfast on August the 9th. So far, we've looked at tables as places where we learn who we are and whose we are, very often by the stories that are shared around that table. We also talked about the fact that when Jesus was at table, it became a very inclusive place, earning Jesus the charge that he was a glutton, a drinker, and one who consorted with people of the lowest possible character. Stories being told with a wildly wide-ranging collection of fellow diners, all of which leads us to see God in new ways and at work in our lives and in the lives of all people. That's where we've been so far. And today we're taking up another important aspect of being at table. The subject today is good manners. Now, if table etiquette is not dead, it is at least mortally wounded. Some of us were taught certain rules, certain behaviors that were expected at the table. A few things that should never be done at the table. Never start eating before a signal from your host to do so. They will most likely nod their head or speak an invitation. It is hardly ever a whistle or a shot from a starting gun. Forks should not be turned over unless being used for eating peas, sweet corn kernels, rice, or other similar foods, in which case it should always be transferred to the right hand. However, at a casual buffet or barbecue, it is acceptable to eat just with a fork. Please note, a fork has tines. A spork is only used for eating at KFC. It is not generally regarded as good table etiquette to use one's bread for dipping into soups or mopping up sauces. This applies to rolls and biscuits as well. Loud eating noises such as slurping and burping are very impolite. This is the #1 sin of dinner table etiquette. No one cares if it's considered a compliment in another culture. Don't do it. Talking with one's mouth full is not only unpleasant to watch, it could lead to choking. Definitely not a good idea. Don't stretch across the table, crossing other guests to reach food, wine, or condiments. Instead, ask a guest sitting close to pass them to you. No one wants to hear how you grew up in a family that would rival the Duggars and had to grab what you could when you could. Good table etiquette sometimes involves a degree of diplomacy when it comes to the host's choice of food and wine. Even if you feel you could do better, don't ever offer your criticism. If you feel unable to pay any compliment, at least remain silent on the subject. Picking your teeth, unless toothpicks are provided, or licking fingers is very unattractive. The only exception to the latter is when eating meat or poultry on the bone, such as chicken legs or ribs, in which case a finger bowl should be provided. By the way, a finger bowl should never be confused with a water glass. Trust me on this one. Drinking too much wine can be very embarrassing. When a different wine is served with each course, it is quite acceptable to not finish each glass. I know the stories of Depression-era deprivation, but that is just an excuse for drinking all the wine. Remember, the first step is admitting that you have a problem. Don't forget to make polite conversation with those guests around you. Dinner parties are not just about the food. They are intended to be a social occasion. It's probably not a good idea to lead with a statement like, How about that Donald Trump? There are certain behaviors and actions and manners that should be observed and practiced at the table. Now, according to the customs of first century Corinth, formal meals in Corinth were usually class-specific. Rarely would people of different social status eat together. Social peers of the host would be entertained in an inner room and served the most elegant meal. People of less status would dine in outer rooms or in the courtyard on less costly food, and on down to the servants who would not eat at all but only serve the others. At the end of the evening meal, all would be invited to join in the rituals of the organization. And that's where Paul begins. When you come together, he says to the Corinthians, it is not really to eat the Lord's Supper, for when the time comes to eat, each of you goes ahead with your own supper, and one goes hungry and another becomes drunk. Do you not have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you show contempt for the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What should I say to you? Should I commend you in this matter? I do not commend you. The behavior at the table in Corinth did not measure up to the principles of living in community, of seeing to it that everyone had something, of caring for those who would otherwise be left behind. The community of the table was egalitarian, unrestricted, and free. It was a table of new understanding, a new way of being, a new covenant. Behind everything else that Paul is telling us, he's telling us that this whole Jesus movement thing is unlike anything we encounter beyond the circle of the table. At the table, all are equal, all are welcomed, all are served, and all have an important role to play. At the table, there are no seats of honor, for every seat is a seat of honor, offered to each person by God's grace and compassion. At the table, there is no room for inequity, bias, discrimination, injustice, or bigotry. At the table gathers a community of love and service. And where do we begin learning this alternative way of living? At the table. When we remember our manners, we remember that we are not supposed to eat until everyone else has been served. When we remember our manners, we remember that when we are asked for something by another at the table, we do not take for ourselves before responding to their request. When we remember our manners, please and thank you become second nature. When we remember our manners, gentleness and tenderness surround us. We can only wonder if the lack of such behavior today is directly related to the decline of people gathering for frequent meals at the table. It would make an interesting study. When we gather at tables, we are learning lessons that move into our lives like the ever-expanding circles we see when we cast a stone into a pond. The community of the table moves into the world. The manners of the table becomes the conduct of the world. The courtesy and respect of the table transfers into courtesy and respect as a way of life, even when we are away from the table. When we remember our table manners, self-centeredness in all its distorting forms begins to disappear. When we remember our table manners, the other becomes more important than the self. When we remember our table manners, we focus on those with whom we are seated. We engage in conversation. We listen and learn, and our level of joy increases. And the simple truth is that if you can learn to pass the potatoes without grabbing what you want, there is a greater chance that you will begin learning to try to put others ahead of yourself and care about what someone else may need. The people at Corinth, God bless them, had tough lessons to learn. We do too. As the world around us takes on more of an ego-centered reality, the table can teach us lessons beyond the obvious behavioral modifications and can lead us to see how we engage with each other beyond the table in new, peaceful, and life-giving ways. That must be one of the lessons, one of the reasons that one of my favorite images of the kingdom of God is a table where people will come, as we often say, from north and south, from east and west, and sit together at table in peace. Why should we wait for that day? Shouldn't we be about that work here and now? Think of it. A table where all people of every shade and hue, of every culture and background, of every religious tradition, of every economic and educational strata, of every possible distinction, are all seated together. People of every nation, every political stripe, every opinion and outlook, sitting together, eating together, speaking together, thinking together, laughing together, crying together. Why should we wait? Pass the biscuits, won't you please? For now and evermore. Amen.